Hey, I'm Rob, and this is going to be a drum build video. First drum build I've done in several months. It's not that I've stopped trying to build drums, it's because the past two I was doing some unique things that did not work, so they crashed and burned. So this will be part one of a drum build video. I'm doing a snakeskin design, which means I've got kind of a diamond grid that looks like a snakeskin that wraps around the outside of the drum. It's a 3D shape that pops out. And it will be out of myrtle wood with some walnut accents. A few things that make this drum unique are, of course, that 3D design, and I'm going to integrate the drum lugs into the drum. Normally you have a metal lug that goes on the side of the drum and the tension rods screw into that, and that pulls down on the heads that gives you a drum sound. This one, I'm going to have wood extrude out of the drum, and a brass tube will attach to those lugs, and that'll make that, again, a unique drum. There's some other people doing drums this way, and they honestly do a great job. I've thought about doing this for years, and I finally come up with a design that I think works for me. I'll talk more about it in a little bit, but I'm going to use a Mortise and Tenon style design on that instead of gluing a piece on top of the drum or having an oversized drum and carving away all the excess. This will be the lug will glue into the drum, and it'll be a different kind of wood. It'll be walnut. Like I said, the drum is going to be myrtle, and I'm going to have walnut accents like those lugs. So far, it's not done yet, but I'm proceeding forward with it. I really like how this is coming out. This could really be a special drum. So let's talk about the design. I'm going to switch to the screen in a second here, and we can look at how I've designed this. I mentioned the term mortise and tenon a few times already, and it's probably best to explain really what that means. It was used, well, for centuries, thousands of years, they've been using mortise and tenon. Before they had nails, it was a way for joinery of pieces of wood. You have a pocket and a plug that goes into that. The tighter the fit, the better. And I'm going to use glue in mine, of course, to make it even stronger yet. But just the mortise and tenon concept has lasted many, many, many eons. Is a great way to join wood. So that's what a mortise and tenon is, and I already noticed that I mix up that term every once in a while, so if I make a mistake later in the video and say the word tenon when I meant mortise, please forgive me. So here we are inside my design software for the CNC, and you can hear my dog playing in the background. This is just a basic drum shape that I'm using to start with, and then I've got a 3D file that I'll wrap around that, so let's let it generate that image, see what it's going to look like in the end. It can be a little slow rendering because there's a lot of processing going on in the background here. It first shows it flat, then it'll wrap around that cylinder. And first it starts rough and it'll get a better shape there. So that's what it'll actually look like, hopefully in the end. And then also have slots here that will hold those brass rods. Tubes will fit in that slot going this way. There'll be we'll thread each side of that, so the tension rods can screw into it this way, and that'll put tension on it. You pull the drum heads down tight. Also have holes going through each spot here, and I'll tap the side of those rods to attach that to the drum itself. In the end drum, this will be walnut here, and the rest of the drum will be myrtle. I already mentioned those two colors, but it'll be a contrasting colors. Should come out nice, I'm hoping. Actually, I've already done it. I'm making this video afterwards. The drum's not finished by far, but at least that part is done, and it's striking. I really like it. We look at this. I'm going to switch to flat. It's easier to look at that way. And again, this does pop out a little bit, but the 3D image, it's kind of one of those 3D designs that makes it pop out and makes it look much more than it actually is. It's actually about 0.18, about a 3/16 of an inch it pops out. If I can get an angle here where you can see it. It does concave, convex out a little bit, but not as much as you think from some of those designs. But the drum badge, my logo will go here, and this is the butt plate for the snares, and then the throw will be here, which of course wraps around. That's the other side of that plate. And I'll have a logo there too. I fought a little bit of that logo. That'll probably be video 2. But my first plan did not work out very well, and I went to plan 2, probably plan 3 is what I finally did. Came out nice in the end. But again, I'm putting a lot of time into this drum. A good shop could probably do what I'm doing. Well, I'm doing quite unique stuff. They can make a nice drum in hours or days when you have everything up. But this one, gosh, I started this probably a month and a half, 2 months ago, and this is just a hobby. I'm not doing this full time. I have a real job. I've taken 2 weekend vacations since the start of this drum. So very slow going, but I do this because I like doing it. I'm not doing this to be some kind of master builder and get rich making drums. That's my only goal, is to make money to buy more equipment and more drums. And I just want a self-sustaining hobby here, not a grandiose business. And here you can see notice how it's bumped up a little bit. That's the snare bed. On most snare drums, you actually indent a little bit on the bearing edge of the drum so that, well, the snares will fit inside that slot. And of course, the other side of the drum, if we go to this edge here, you can see it'll indent a little bit. Whoops. Here too. I'll switch back to 3D. You can probably see that better. And as it gets better video, there we go. You can see it bumps up a little bit here, and if I go to the other side, you'll see the same thing on the other side of the drum. Right there, as we get to the video, gets better. There we go. So that's what a snare bed is. So that's most of the design process. I do all the 3D work I do outside of VCarve Pro. It does not let you do that. I use Blender and some other things to get what I want, combine it, and then I import it in here. Someday I might buy the more expensive version of Aspire, same company, great software, but as a hobbyist, wow, it's not cheap. I have a hard time justifying that much for just a hobby, but maybe someday, if somebody wants to buy this drum for a bunch of money, then that might justify it in the end. We'll see. As I mentioned before, I'm going to do integrated lugs in this drum, and I'm going to have a pocket cut into the side of the drum, or through the drum, and I'll have a piece of wood that'll go through into that, wedge into that shape, and it'll stick up proud up here, and those brass tubes will go through that piece up there. Notice how it gets smaller as it goes through. I mean, it's going toward the center. So if we measure that, this is just an example. This isn't the real world, but it's close. So the top edge is 0.75 inches. But if you go down to where it gets through the drum, it's down to 684, 6486. Boy, wow, how I read that. Dyslexia. So it's going to get smaller as it goes through, a wedge piece of pie, basically. So let's look at the real world stuff, my tests, and how it's going to look. So at the top of the drum, it'll be wider, whoops, the outside edge, and each cut's going to be a little smaller as I'm cutting into this. Very thin layers, and by the time you get to the bottom, it'll be this one. So it gets smaller as it goes through. But notice on the edges it's the same because it's round on one side, but it's flat on the other, so it doesn't need to get wider here to wedge in. And we look up here at my numbers when I was testing this. The top, it's 0.805, and the bottom is 0.745, 1.9 degrees. And I did multiple tests. In fact, once I've done this, I'm going to switch to the camera, and I'll show how the test looked and how it came out. So here is my test jig for when I was working on these inserts, the drum lugs, Mortise and Tenon, whatever you want to say here. Notice it's got an arc right there. That's the same as a drum. It would be a 13.875 outside edge of a drum. And I cut the pockets in here. And these were done on the CNC, the rotary CNC. So this pocket is wider on the top than it is on the bottom. You can get the calipers out and measure it, but you'll have to trust me on that. And here's my test piece that I cut, not on the rotary CNC, but the regular CNC. If you look real careful, I'm not sure you can tell here, but it actually gets a little thinner on this side than it is on this side. And you might be able to even see the little ridges. I don't know how good my camera is going to show that, but there you can probably see it. You can see the little ridges. Each one is a different cut, got a little wider or smaller, whichever side you're starting from. And when we put it to our piece here, if I put it in the right way here, it goes in, it's nice and tight, comes through the bottom. There's actually a smidge extra on the bottom, but not much. And that'll get shaved off. We cut the inside of the drum. So great fit, and that's the plan. Add some glue when I do it in the final version, and that will stick in there really well. Not coming apart. Okay, let's go to the next step. Here are the slats I'm using for the drum. There are 20 slats or staves, whatever you want to call them, and they will wrap around the drum just like a whiskey barrel does. If you notice closely, the grain is going left to right. So I had one single board and I cut the slats in order on that, so you should be able to follow the grain all the way around the drum. So here's a side angle of the drum after it's been glued up. And if you look, you can even see the grain flow around the outside edge from this angle too. And here's a final shot of the inside of the drum before I start working on it. If you look closely, you can see I've numbered the staves. It's important I keep those in order if I want to keep that grain pattern tied together correctly. Now it's time to mount the drum onto the CNC machine. There's a threaded rod that goes through the middle of the drum. Technically it's two threaded rods, and I have a coupler between the two. I'll screw that in and tighten it up so it works as one threaded rod. And the next step is to tighten the clamshell on each side so it's held tight on that threaded rod. It takes a little while to get everything lined up and perfect, but it's not that hard either. And we'll have a quick shot of it actually going around, showing it's centered on there and what the drum looks like before any finishing. The next step is to skim the outside of the drum. I'll do this in two passes. The first pass, I'm taking off any high spots and getting it close to where it needs to be. And the last step, I'll take off a thinner layer, and it'll be nice and smooth. Though, in the end, I'm going to carve the 3D shape into this, so this step, you could say, is not really needed, but it's still nice to see what we have to work with. And now a shot after it's been skimmed. Nothing special done here, just skimming. I haven't sanded, anything like that. You'll see a few imperfections in there that I will eventually fill with epoxy. First I'll dig out the old knot or wherever it is. And I really like the character that myrtle wood has. It's going to come out really nice. Off camera, I CNC'd the first pocket or mortise for my Mortise and Tenon lugs to go into. And I have to admit, it is scary cutting a hole into a beautiful drum like that. Potentially, it could mess up, but my test piece fits in perfectly, and I have to say I am very happy if you can't tell. Now that I know my Mortise and Tenon concept will work, it's time to drill all the other holes. There'll be 20 total, 10 lugs, and each lug takes 2 holes. I'll show 2 or 3 at the regular speed, then I'll speed it up because we don't want to watch too much of just the same thing repeating here. Now it's time to cut the lugs or tenons. I've moved to my traditional CNC, my non-rotary CNC, and I'm cutting the tenons out. You can't really tell, but at the top, it's a smaller diameter hole. We talked about that earlier in the video, and it gets a little bit wider the further we go down. And now it's time to glue the lugs into the drum or the tenon in the mortise. First step is to put glue in the pocket, so plenty of glue there, and then also put glue on the lug and tap it in nice and tight so it's a good firm fit. And then you'll see my trick I use with putting sawdust around the edge to get any excess glue. But again, in the end, I'm going to be doing a 3D carve around this, so any excess glue is going to get cut away anyway. So that's a little redundant, but it's one of the things I guess I always do. And we'll skip ahead after all the lugs have been glued in, and I'll do a quick rotation so you can see how it looks at this point. And now we get to the fun part, the 3D carve onto the drum. I'm using an 1/8 inch ball nose bit, and it's going about 150 inches per minute back and forth. This process took around 7 hours, so it's not fast at all, but of course, I can go inside and drink coffee and watch this on my video screen so I know what's going on. If you look close on that right-hand lug we just went over, there's actually a smidge it didn't cut, and that's to be expected. I'll do some sanding, it'll look great in the end. Getting the tolerances perfect to where the lug starts and the drum ends is kind of tough. It's down to the 100th of an inch. And there'll be some sanding to get this just right, but I'm okay with that. You'd like to think of CNC as magic and it does this click of a button, there's no finishing, whatever. It ain't quite that easy, guys. There's a lot of work to do by hand still. I'll go ahead and speed it up now so we can get through this a little bit faster before I finish up this video. The last step for the exterior of the drum, at least for this video, is cutting the slots in the lugs for the brass tube. It'll make more sense in a little bit, but I'm cutting a pocket in there and a brass tube will lay in that slot going from the left to the right, and that eventually will hold the tension rods, which will pull down the drum heads. And now for the last portion of the video. I'll do a complete rotation so you can see how the drum looks at this point. The next video, I will work on the badge, or my logo that'll go on the drum. Actually, I had a few issues trying to get that done, but in the end it came out very nice, but several trials and tribulations. I'm planning on 4 or even 5 videos for this drum build series. So if you're enjoying this, please click the subscribe button and follow along. Thanks for your support, everyone.